Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual retreat. I'm Lane with Pineapple Support, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Next up, we have Pineapple Support therapist Kristina Andaya. Kristina will be speaking to us today about anxiety reduction, a critical topic that can actually benefit all of us these days. Hi, Kristina. Welcome to the stage.
Hi there. How are you, Lane?
Great, great.
Perfect. So as Lane said, I am Kristina Andaya. I am an associate marriage and family therapist and clinical professional counselor here in Las Vegas. And today we are going to talk about anxiety and, more importantly, a little bit about how we can reduce anxiety when it does creep up for us. So we'll go ahead and start with the obvious. What is anxiety? So different from worry, we can worry about things pretty much on a daily basis, worried about being late to work, worried about getting somewhere on time. But anxiety is a little bit different. So anxiety is the severe or persistent, oftentimes debilitating worry that changes the way that we function and often brings on avoidance. So when we feel severe anxiety, a lot of times we look to avoid the things that we maybe need to do on a daily basis, or the thing that is actually causing the anxiety, we look to avoid that altogether. So anxiety is a reaction to a perceived threat, and that threat is usually stressful or perceived by us as dangerous. So we often sense unease before a significant event. So basically what that means is that our subconscious has the ability to tap into something in our brain that can perceive the threat before we're even aware that it's actually there. So that sometimes can be in forms of things like that gut feeling that you have that something's not quite right. And so that will be a perceived threat for us, which in turn makes our anxiety rise. So anxiety is actually an adapted response. It allows us to perceive danger and prepares us to cope with the environment around us, whether it's actually dangerous or not. And while some levels of anxiety keep us on our toes, right, and alert, anxiety disorder can feel far from normal and be severe. So the types of anxiety that we actually look at in the therapeutic sense can include generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and then obsessive compulsive disorder, as well as specific phobias. So not necessarily all, but specific phobias can actually cause our anxiety to rise. And that's something that we do work on, pretty much on a daily basis in the therapeutic community. So a little bit about how anxiety affects our brain. So our brain is a structure that we know develops in utero. The brain itself, a lot of people think that it starts developing from the front all the way to the back. But in actuality, our brain develops from the back to the front. The front of our brain, which is the frontal lobe, is the thing that gives us more on the lines of rational thought. But there's that one little piece of the brain inside, and it's about the shape of an almond, and it is called the amygdala. So the amygdala is the part of our brain that sits in the temporal lobe, and it helps us trigger our sympathetic nervous system. So on a daily basis, we all sit in a state of parasympathetic. We're pretty much okay. Baseline, thing looks pretty good. And then we are perceiving threats. And as we perceive a threat that's a little too much for us to handle, our amygdala starts to work. And what that does is trigger our fight, flight, or freeze response. So that is part of our sympathetic nervous system. That response in itself helps us to determine the path of least resistance. What is the thing that I'm going to be able to do to get me out of this situation that I fear and is causing me anxiety, but also how do I mediate anxiety and panic at the same time and have a response that's the best option for me? So we know people tend to do one of the three. So flight is when we kind of run away from the threat. So in the instance that you were in the woods and you stumbled upon a bear, of course, depending on what type of bear we're talking about, your reaction or your trigger might be to flee. That's to, flight, run away. we know that will get us away from the bear, create proximity with the bear that would be safer for us. Some options to actually have a response are fight. So we become a little bit of the hypervigilant, and we are ready to kind of ward off whatever is coming at us. Something that we perceive as a threat that's scary, or we want to get it away, we might fight it instead of running away from it. And then the last response, and some of you might remember this wasn't actually an option back in the day, but the last response that we see now is freeze. And that's essentially when our brain kind of just checks out. We are not able to make a response that seems maybe even appropriate in the environment that we're in. So we just kind of stop, and our brain kind of just shuts off for us. So the amygdala is best known for its role in processing fear, and actually suggests that the amygdala has the ability to assess fear before we are consciously aware of it. So even if there's nothing to be afraid of, and even if the threat is only perceived, we do again have the ability to know that something's there, something's a little bit scary or off-putting before our conscious brain is set up to acknowledge that. And when that happens, that's when our amygdala turns on. So the interesting thing about the amygdala is that it is suggestive that the amygdala is involved in experiencing anxiety and may be overactive in people with anxiety disorders. So when we think of the almond-shaped little guy in our brain, we as a human species have the ability to have that almond brain piece of our brain grow. And actually, there is research that suggests as we continue to work on reducing anxiety and becoming in a state of sympathetic more often than not, that pea-sized mechanism in our brain actually can shrink. So it can kind of get to an overactive state where we experience anxiety a lot more often. Our reactions are a lot more anxiety provoked or anxiety driven. And that in itself can be a little problematic for us. So the amygdala also does play a role in evaluating things in the environment to determine their importance. So in the event that we feel fearful, that we feel that our anxiety is rising, the amygdala helps us determine in the environment they're in, what are the factors that are scary for me? What are the factors that may be okay? Is there an access for me to get out of this environment and run away? So it's doing all of this kind of as we are just feeling the anxiety. The sympathetic nervous system in itself, a little bit with other components of your brain, like the emotional center. It works with our hippocampus. So the emotional center obviously is part of what our emotional makeup is. The amygdala has kind of a balance with the emotions. We feel fear. Anxiety is a fear-based emotion. We might feel stressed. We might feel overwhelmed, and we might feel angry. And those things work together with the amygdala and what we would know as the limbic system, the emotional center of our brain. Our frontal lobe, for example, has more rational thoughts. So the frontal lobe is designed to think rationally when we need it to. So it's why you can balance a checkbook. It's why you can get in a car and drive without really thinking more than twice about it. It's where we kind of absorbed all the information that we've been given in the stages of our life as we've grown and learned. And then we have the hippocampus, which is more towards the back of our brains, and that is responsible for memory. So amygdala and hippocampus play a lot on each other when it comes to anxiety. And once the amygdala is kind of ignited, if you will, there is an aspect that once the ignition of that amygdala is running and it's running really high, then it does have an effect on what our memory is. And so the basolateral amygdala and its interactions with the hippocampus and our prefrontal cortex, so those sections of the brain, they play a part in stress reducing and impairment of the memory retrieval and your working memory. So that's in a nutshell, kind of what that means is that as all these things are happening in your brain during an anxiety provoking moment, there is a very real possibility that you might have experienced impaired memory or memory loss during that traumatic or stressful time. Why? And here's a little bit of an example. Back in the day, I used to work in finance, and I worked in a bank, and our bank had been robbed a few times. And when that happens, we are designed and told as in the environment, as workers in the bank, to isolate the person that has had the experience and get them on the phone immediately so they can capture those memories as quickly as possible, because memories will start to alter and memories will start to get lost, and they might change as the stress and anxiety starts to flood your system. And it does that by the hormone cortisol. So when cortisol starts flooding into your system, a lot of things happen in your body, a lot of things happen in your brain, and so we lose little aspects of the experience. So the amygdala's mechanism is to facilitate a robust encoding of an emotionally salient memories that can be maladaptive under certain conditions and traumatic, and they can cause actually chronic stress. So to move on, we are going to talk a little bit about how anxiety also affects the body, because it does, as much as it does in the brain, in those few moments as you're experiencing anxiety or even a traumatic instance or experience, that also is happening, something is going on in the body as well. So as I'm a therapist who works with body and mind connection, and I have a lot of clients who experience chronic pain and chronic illness. And that is a lot of what we know scientifically. The brain has a mass effect on our body and our physical being, but our physical being can also, in fact, have a little bit of an effect on our brains. So the way the anxieties can affect the body, we can feel like a sense of doom, that overwhelming anxiety that causes frequent and feelings of intense. It may also alter your concentration. It may make it very difficult for you to concentrate. Panic attacks is another area where we see how anxiety affects the body. So they can lead to a number of physical symptoms, including chest pain or chest constriction, feeling that tightness in your chest, heart palpitations, dizziness, flashes of heat throughout the body, and sometimes even tunnel vision. Anxiety can also cause depression. Chronic anxiety can increase your risk for depression. Symptoms include social withdrawal, loss of interest in things that you may have once loved, and feelings of guilt or hopelessness. They can also contribute to headaches. Headaches are very common from a constant state of worry or stress. And then more specifically, heart palpitations can occur with panic attacks if our anxiety kind of rides on both of anxiety attack versus panic. But they can be seen with anxiety as well. Quickening of a pace or intensity is very common when we talk about how heart palpitations come about with anxiety provoking situations. So other ways that anxiety can affect the body. So anxiety can cause rapid and shallow breathing. It can cause a decrease in sexual desire. It can cause stomach pains that can be accompanied by nausea or diarrhea. Anxiety can be exhausting, leaving you feel wiped out. Sometimes difficulty even getting out of bed at times. You may experience sleep disturbance from anxiety. Sleep disturbance is a really key factor in how we kind of recover and how we can maintain wellness when we do experience anxiety. Sleep has a huge effect on our mental state and our physical body. So sleep disturbance is a really key factor when we talk about how anxiety is affecting us. And then when anxiety flares up, it is common to feel your blood pressure rise. Sometimes people report actually feeling like it's actually growing inside them, or their blood pressure is rising, or they feel like a buildup. And then anxiety can also contribute to unexplained body aches and pains. So a little bit of a note on that. When we talk about how anxiety contributes to unexplained body aches and pains, typically I find that people who have experienced anxiety on a regular basis might notice this a little bit more. People who may have experienced a significant anxiety filled event, or even traumatic event, excuse me, may be able to explain future body aches and pains. And what I mean by that is that we generally might feel, or even the next day after an event that has happened to us, where we have put so much tension and so much buildup into our muscles, that we might actually feel a little bit sore the next day. And that's completely common when we talk about how anxiety can really affect our body. Let's see. So one of the areas of anxiety, how to work on anxiety, is through cognitive thought process. So this is the part where I want to get to, where we can talk a little bit about how can we alleviate anxiety, but at the same time understand and pinpoint that it does actually occur, that we are susceptible to it in many areas of our life, but really how to find an area that we can sustain. We can sustain our thought process, can sustain our behavior, and what that looks like. So one of the more commonly used theoretical approaches when we talk about anxiety is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, addresses negative thought patterns, and thought distortions, in the way that we view the world and the way that we view ourselves. Cognitive obviously means how we examine thoughts. Cognitive is thought, or how we examine our cognitions and how it contributes to anxiety. And then behavior examines how you react to situations that trigger anxiety. So how does that work? How do we do that, right? That's the burning question, is how do we take our thoughts and our behavior and make it something that does not contribute or foster an environment of anxiety? So how do we challenge a thought? Thought process can be challenged in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that we therapeutically can do that is to look at what we call a thought distortion, or a cognitive distortion. So cognitive distortions are, they're a little bit along the lines of untruths that we tell us. There are 12 different cognitive distortions that we as a species kind of dabble in. And really, as the thoughts begin to increase, a lot of times I will hear from clients or people in discussion that the racingness of the thoughts, the idea that the thought is always perpetuating forward, gives us that spiral feeling, where we will hear people say, I've spiraled out of control, or I've spiraled into this thought that I'm all the way at the bottom and don't know how to spiral back up. So the challenge is, how do we change that thought into something positive that we can be okay with and also maintain? So identifying the thought is the very first piece of this. With anxiety disorders, situations as perceived as dangerous, or more dangerous than they actually are, that is where we find a lot of negative thoughts kind of spiral from or spin from. So to take a negative thought, we do an exercise typically that kind of allows us to look at the thought for what it is, kind of identify where the negative in that is, and how do we shift that? How do we change that? So I like to address negative thoughts or cognitive distortions as twisted thinking. Twisted thinking is, in a sense, the way that we look at something from a different perspective, from a negative perspective. And so with that, an exercise that is outlined in the 12 different cognitive distortions is to identify the negative thought and then to kind of unravel it. So what I mean by that is a little bit of a game that you can play that's called, I call it, high school science. So high school science looks a little bit like, what's my negative thought? My negative thought is my distortion. So in my thought process, I might take something like something simple, like I've gotten to a car accident last week. And my thought process is that I got into a car accident. My car was totaled. Nobody was seriously injured, which is a good thing, right? That's a positive. But the next time I go to get in a car to drive it, or my car to drive it, I immediately have a rush of anxiety because all I know is I can take the thought of my driving my car and I can equate it to a car accident. So that's my negative thought. That's distortion. And my distortion is that I will get in a car accident if I get in my car and drive it, regardless of what else is happening. So I know for myself that that's a very scary thing. It's scary to think about getting in another car accident again. So I might take this opportunity to identify what the negative thought is. So in this instance, the negative thought is that I will definitely get in a car accident again. And my job to kind of reduce my anxiety is to challenge that negative thought. And to challenge that, I use a technique that, again, it's kind of debunking that hypothesis. So my hypothesis is the negative thought, and I have to, that's my challenge. I have to debunk this. I have to find ways that it's not the whole reason why I have to get in my car and drive, that I will always get in a car accident. It's not necessarily a truth, right? So it is a irrational that every time I now step into my car, a car accident will result. So as we do that, we can work through a process where we look at the negative, we challenge the negative, and then we can challenge it even further by saying, what are the truths about this thought? Am I 100% going to get into a car accident? Probably not. Am I would I maybe get in a car accident again some other day at some other time and maybe some other year? Absolutely. It's a very real possibility. But it doesn't necessarily mean today is that day. So I have now started to debunk that thought process. And now I'm going to replace that negative thought with realistic and rational thought. Am I a safe driver? Yes. Have I been in multiple car accidents before? No. Do I feel I can get from point A to point B without getting in an accident? Yeah, probably. So now I've kind of gone through the process of identifying negativity. I've challenged those thoughts and I've now replaced them with a negative or realistic thought pattern. Sounds pretty easy, not necessarily all the time though. So just to kind of clarify, this process, the distortions that we work under, and challenging those automatic thoughts is a real difficult process sometimes, especially when we talk about things that are anxiety provoking, that are very frightening and challenging for us to even look at identification of them. So there is again a strategy that I like to have people use. Another way that we can kind of challenge the thought is by using something that is totally rational, that is supported by data, and that is to change our automatic by using percentages. So to do that, what we would do is look again at the negative thought. We identify what that is, and then when we identify what that is, I like for people to ask themselves, where in my body do I feel this? So if I say I'm having this thought and I'm feeling anxiety, I feel it fearful of this, the idea of getting back in my car because I had this terrible accident. And where do I feel that in my body? I might feel it in my shoulders. I might feel it, I might feel sweaty. I might feel like I can't stop moving my hands or tapping on things. I might feel that I have a headache coming on. I might have memories of like how my body actually felt after the last accident that are triggering me to have a response that's negative, to have that anxiety. And so normally, as we challenge these thoughts, this would be a prime opportunity for someone to say, I'm not getting in my car and I'm going to go home. And when we do that, we get to the point where we start to challenge, but we haven't replaced the thought yet. So, working with percentages, what we can do is very similar to the last example, is say, what is the percentage that I think as I identify anxiety and as I feel it in my body and as I feel frightened thoughts, what's the percentage that I think I will actually be unsafe right now? And I might say 90%. I think 90%. So then I go back and I do the challenge of the negative thoughts and I say, what tells me or what indicates to me that this isn't true? What can I tell myself in a very positive way why this isn't necessarily true, and how do I replace those negative thoughts with realistic thoughts? Um, so that's another piece of the puzzle where we want to find the percentage over what is the thoughts. What's the positivity? If I do get in my car, I know the anxiety will be there a little bit. And I go ahead and get from point A to point B and I arrive and I make it. What's the percentage that I'm going to have a reduction in anxiety? That I'm going to feel a little bit better and I'm going to feel a little bit more confident the next time. I might say 80%, right? So at least I have a little bit of wiggle room. I have percentages to work with. If we are in a state where our anxiety is heightened all the way up to where I'm saying 100%, then we again have to keep working through the identification, the challenge, and the replacement of those thoughts. So replacing negative thoughts with realistic thoughts is really important. Once you've identified the irrational predictions and negative distortions in your anxious thoughts, you can replace them with new thoughts that are more accurate and positive. We can also work on coming up with calming statements you can say to yourself. So affirmation that you can say to yourself when you're facing or anticipating a situation that normally sends your anxiety kind of soaring. So if we're in a situation where you have had anxiety before, there's great ways to come up with certain affirmations to say to yourself, this is a safe environment. I know I'll be okay. And one of the best ways to start doing that is really identifying your safety. Safety is a very important part of the wheel of anxiety and how we manage that. So in the ability to say, I am safe here, I'm okay here, I have a way to leave this environment if I need to. Those are all of the things that are really important when working with a challenging thought. All right. So the second kind of part of what I wanted to talk about today is mindfulness. So mindfulness and CBT are different. And you'll notice here I have a little GIF here that will help us breathe in, and it's timed, right, with the different aspects of the first triangle, then square, then octagon, and all of the ones that follow. But this allows you to focus, really get focused on what your breath is doing, what your thoughts are doing, and the most important aspect of what this little object here does, this little exercise, is that it allows you to focus in on one specific thing and not necessarily all of the things that are going on around you. So as we breathe in with the GIF and we breathe out with it, we can notice that we are very focused on what it's actually doing, the visual aspect of it, and then of course what it's asking us to do, which is breathe. So mindfulness is, in mindfulness, talk about grounding. And so grounding in therapy is a little bit different than grounding maybe in yoga. I mean, concept wise, it's very similar. But grounding in the sense of therapy is a translation that equates to the ability to detach from pain. And so pain, emotional pain, comes in a lot of different forms. It comes in the form of anxiety, of course, stress, anger, sadness, sometimes self-harm. And so mindfulness encompasses the idea of grounding. And what we want to do with that is find different ways that we can get a little busy and get a little distracted on things that are going, or distracted from, I should say, things that are going on in our environment around us that are causing anxiety to happen or causing that thought process to start. So we're going to move on to ways you can ground. And there are 3 different types of grounding. In therapy, we talk about mental, physical, and soothing. So you might find one of these are helpful, work better for you. Of course, with any other with any of the emotions that we experience as human beings, it is one of the things that I want to relay and validate for everyone is that We experience emotions, and those emotions that we experience are unique to us. And what I mean by that is that I have anxiety over certain things, but one of my friends or one of my family members might experience anxiety as well, but it's not the same. I might have anxiety over things like skydiving, where one of my family members might be jumping out of planes every day. So when I say it's unique to you, it is actually unique to each individual person. Experience it differently, even though the concept and construct of the way that it actually works in the body and the mind is very much the same. We can experience anxiety or fear or anger very differently from one another. So when we look at the ways to ground, it's very kind of similar to that statement. And what I mean by that is some of the aspects that we're about to talk about in grounding. You might say, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Someone next to you might say, that sounds terrible. I would never even try that. So as we go through these, I invite you to kind of keep an open mind to see what ones you might resonate with as useful, and then other people might resonate with something different. So mental grounding is focusing on your mind, what your mind is doing, and how to kind of distract from the things that it's telling itself, what your mind is actually telling you with the thoughts, and refocusing it on something else. Physical grounding is focusing primarily on your five senses. And we utilize the five senses to really quickly change the reaction that we have when we are faced with those challenging thoughts. And then the third one is soothing. So talking to yourself in a very kind way. When we work with these three, sometimes we might find that mental grounding works really well for us and soothing works okay, but physical might not work at all. We might not really be in tune with our five senses, or a flip of that is that we are so in tune with our five senses that it's more anxiety provoking. So when we get to the physical aspects, we'll talk a little bit more about why that might happen. So let's move on here to kind of, oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. So let's talk a little bit about each of these different grounding techniques and why some of them might work better than the others. So grounding, again, is a simple set of strategies that can help you detach from emotional pain. So it's basically a way to distract yourself by focusing on something else other than the difficult emotions that you are currently experiencing. You may also think of grounding as centering, distracting, creating a safe space, or a healthy detachment from what's going on around you. So, grounding doesn't necessarily solve the problem that is contributing to your unpleasant emotion. So, it's not necessarily a mechanism to say, okay, let's kind of unravel this whole process of thought. That's more of the CBT side that we just talked about. But grounding is a useful it's useful because it gives us a temporary way to gain control over our feelings and prevent things from getting worse. Or prevent, excuse me, things from getting worse. It anchors us, right? It gives us a very useful technique to help calm us down, and eventually return and address the problem maybe at a later time or even later in the hour. But it does help us from finding ways to detach from that trigger, from that unpleasant emotion and where that kind of originated from. And grounding, the thing that, one of the things that is a takeaway from this part of our presentation is that grounding can be done anytime, anywhere, and no one has to know that you're even doing it. So we want grounding techniques to be, in a sense, be able to travel with you very easily. And so grounding utilizes some physical or tangible aspects, but it also utilizes things that you can do right within. So looking within yourself and just utilizing those techniques to calm your anxiety down. So again, there's physical and soothing grounding. Those are the three types of grounding. One type might work better for you, but in reality, each type is helpful. So you might take away a little bit from each of the three and then use them as at your leisure. So let's talk about mental grounding first. Mental grounding is usually, basically focusing on using our mind. Um, and how that works, for an example, there's a really good technique using your mind that is helpful when we start to feel anxiety come on, and that is describing your environment in detail. Sometimes we like to do that with the 5 4 3 2 1 method, and so it's very simplistic. We choose 5 things in our environment. So I could say in my office I have 2 bookshelves, I have a cabinet, and I have 2 office chairs. So that's 5 things in my office, 5 things that are in my environment. Then I would choose 4 that I can write with in my office. So I have pens, pencils, I have markers, whiteboard markers, and crayons. And then I would choose 3 things that I can read in my office. And behind me, you can see I have 3 different books that I can name off that could be part of my method. 2 things in my office that I use to invite people to know they're in a safe space, maybe things to fidget with, or a piece of hard candy. And then 1 thing that I have in my office that I know is comforting, I have a blanket. So we want to use that method. So it's very simple and it doesn't take a long time, but it does really kind of help you focus. Even when you're stumbling a little bit over what to choose or how to say it, it still is creating an environment where your brain is actually focused on something that can detach you from what's going on around you. That's kind of what we want to happen. You can play categories with yourself. So trying to think of things like different breeds of dogs, 10 different jazz musicians. If you can do that, great. People who are famous that begin their first names begin with the letter P. All of these type of things where you really have to think a lot, and those were kind of hard examples that you might have to think a little bit more about how to express those. Describe an everyday activity in great detail. So one of my favorite things about this one is using recipes. Not only because I'm a terrible cook, but more so that I can actually articulate each step of that process where I can say, okay, first you get out all your ingredients, and this is what I would use to create this dish. Then I go through each aspect of how I do it, what I chop, how do I actually cook it? Is it on the grill? Is it in the oven? And so again, it's kind of honing your focus into a very specific set of imagining or visualization is a really great way to use your mind to distract from anxiety or other things that are happening around you. So visualization can be finding a place that you really love that you've been, thinking about yourself actually physically being there. It can be future facing as well. It can be like, okay, a week from now, I really wanted to do this one thing or go to this certain place. And I'm going to visualize myself actually in the act of doing that, kind of willing it to happen. Reading something or saying each word to yourself. So, reading something, even grabbing a box of cereal and reading the back of it, saying each word very methodically and slowly. So, you're just really focused on that. And then another really great one is either counting to 10 or saying the alphabet. Counting to 10 seems really easy, right? It's one of those like, okay, I'm gonna count to 10, or I'm gonna count 10 to kind of relieve that anxiety. I like to tell people to say the alphabet forwards and then say it backwards because that's not as easy as it sounds. And most people, they have to really think and kind of hone in on what that looks like in order to even do it. The second area that we're going to talk about is physical grounding. So focusing on our senses, really taking note of which senses that you enjoy kind of having boosted, right? And again, which senses that are a little bit problematic. So if you have an aversion to like loud sounds, or some people love the sound of like white noise and some people just can't even tolerate it, be in tune with that. So I invite you to take a look just internally of like, what are my 5 senses? I can visually see things, I can hear things, touch things, and then I can smell and taste. Are any of these things to me? would they create more anxiety? We definitely don't want to dabble in that. So we want to make sure that we're always kind of in tune with our body and our response, so we know kind of what that feels like, and if it's a little bit off-putting, again, that we don't want to kind of go there. So a couple examples of physical grounding, really good ways to kind of get into this is to try running your hands under water. Sometimes people put their feet in water. They kind of just sit, sit nicely in their living room, have a little bucket, and they can put their feet in there. It's very soothing. Um, Grab tightly onto your chair as hard as possible and kind of just bunch up your muscles and release them. I don't even necessarily think that needs a chair. You can actually just sit and kind of like bunch up your muscles, get that like tight feeling, and then release it. And it gives you like a really good feeling of like your muscles releasing. Some of the anxiety can dissipate from that. And then touching various objects around you. So tactile things that we can touch, different surfaces, different fabrics, those can be helpful to kind of really ground us down and allow us to kind of come back into a space where we can identify our safety, how well that is looking, bring us back into a space where we can be a little bit less anxiety filled. Again, noticing your body is a really great one. So, a technique that I like for people to use is called the body crawl. It's kind of just going from your toes all the way to your head and just feeling like identifying and really honing in on those spaces in your body, like your toes. Can you wiggle them? Do you feel that they're there? They're alive. Things are working. And then crawl all the way up your body so you're feeling different aspects of your body and kind of being a little more in tune with that. Stretching's great. Clenching and releasing your fists are great. You can do that with your full body. So another one that I really like is savoring something to eat. So using your sense of taste. When I work with little guys, little kids, a lot of times kids think they like hot stuff, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they really do like it. So I always tell parents, and sometimes for adults too, keep a bag of Takis or something that you find spicy in your house, and then bite down on it. Get that sensation going where it's like a complete and utter distraction of what's going on that you can hone in on. And of course, the last one is going to be focusing on your breathing. There is one other that I actually find this one the most successful out of all of the suggestions that I have given clients over time in session, and that is to hold 2 ice cubes in your hands. And the reason why I like it so much is because it gives the physical and tactile sensation again that you are touching something, but what it does is it creates this thing where in your brain you cannot dispute the fact that you are holding something cold. And so your brain immediately shifts from whatever's going on and causing the anxiety to I'm holding something cold. And that's the way that your brain actually works. So holding ice cubes in your hand, putting ice cubes under your feet are 2 really good techniques for really quick change. I've had people get hydro flasks and carry ice in their car because sometimes they know they have anxiety provoking or panic type symptomology where they might be driving, and so they need that immediate distraction. And so that's a technique that's been used before. The last of these is the soothing. So saying kind statements to ourselves, talking to ourselves in a very kind way is super important. Reason why is because we are our best ally, right? We know in consciously and subconsciously what we need in order to feel better, to ground. And so these are techniques, again, that we are going to learn that can help us shift from that uncomfortable environment into an environment that's a little more calming. So being kind to yourself, being gentle with yourself is really important. Think of things or picture people that you care about that are important parts of your life. Um, Plan a safe retreat for yourself. Plan somewhere to go or plan a safe treat, meaning, something that you really like, enjoy. Can it be looked at as kind of a reward? Maybe, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that connotation. It can actually be part of your stress reduction plan. And then future facing things. I always like for people to be able to tell me like, hey, what are you excited about in the next 3 weeks, in the next month? What are you doing on 4th of July that's really exciting? What's your favorite holiday? These are the things I'm going to look forward to. Perhaps going out with a friend, going on a hike, getting outside is a really good one. Um, Soothing, a word on soothing, and that is when we venture into the affirmations. Sometimes we read about affirmations that can be a little bit more along the lines of, hey, you're awesome. You are an amazing person. And yes, these are fantastic. We are designed as human beings to dispute that in some way. And so, as we venture into the self affirmations and we enter into more grounding that is soothing, um, my only suggestion is to be cautiously optimistic, to remain kind in every aspect of that. So, if we are finding that we're kind of standing in the mirror, our unabashed self is like, hey, you're awesome. And our brain is like, no, wait, hold on. There's a whole lot of problems with that statement. Remember, you just need to be kind to yourself. And that is one way that we can soothe. And even if it means you say, you know what, today I'm going to just be kind to myself. I'm going to listen to my body. I'm going to listen to my mind, and I'm going to hear what it's telling me. And I'm going to go with that flow. Perfect. That's a great thing to be able to do. So practicing these methods over and over, obviously, is going to be a good thing. Last, what I wanted to just touch on is a little bit more of this, but more along the lines of kind of what's in your toolkit. What do you guys have that is already kind of there that you can grab onto really quickly to dissipate that anxiety? Because when we talk about anxiety, there is a sense that the anxiety itself, again, can't be solved by these little things that we're going to maybe use once in a while, but we can reduce the anxiety enough. When we sit in constant or continual anxiety, we want to find ways that we can at least make it ebb and flow a little bit. We don't want it to just skyrocket and then us fall off at some point. And so we want to create an idea where we can ebb and flow, meaning we can maintain the state of anxiety that we're in by doing different things to distract from it, but also working on the actual thing that is causing the anxiety. So what's in your toolkit is kind of like, what are the things that you have in place, things even around your house, things around your if you are in a studio or anything like that, that you can kind of grab onto or have within your physical proximity that you can get to. So here's a few ideas. So grounding objects, so you could choose maybe like a special rock or a crystal or things like that. Sometimes people keep it in their pockets. It just is nice to be able to put your hand in your pocket and it's there, you feel it, you know what it is, makes you feel better. Great. Blowing bubbles, dancing, tensing everything up and releasing it, meaning your body, working with kinetic sand. Journaling is fantastic. Getting outside is great. Vitamin D does wonders, right? So getting outside, soaking in the sunshine, problem solve a simple task, sit down and do 10 math equations. It's really, I mean, I don't know, I don't love math, but it's hard. So sitting down and finding like, balancing your checkbook, that's a very problem solving, task based thing that you can do that might kind of offset the anxiety. It could provide more anxiety for you. So if that's the case, do something else. Visualization, kind of looking at things. How do we want things to kind of come up for us? Where do I want to visualize myself being in next week? I want to just visualize myself, in Spain for the summer. There's all kinds of things you can do with visualization. Laughter is probably one of the best things that we know of from a scientific and therapeutic standpoint that can really shift mindset for people. So get to a place where you can enjoy laughter and find joy in that. Watching funny shows or comedies, or just sitting with a friend and reminiscing can be a good catalyst for laughter. Scents are very, very scents are kind of some things that can really help us distract or detach. Vicks Vapor Rub, different oils or essential oils, citrus smells, really elevate mood and things like that. Um, Sour, spicy, or salty treats. So there's even people who have limes on hand and they will just literally bite into them. And it gives us such a bitter and sour response to our taste, right? That it actually can shift our mind really quickly. Um, Sensory things that are hot and cold, those can even be drinks. Tactile things, Play-Doh, slime. I mean, I know those seem very juvenile, but they can actually be very helpful for adults as well. And then the last one is just carbonated drink. So if you have a carbonated drink, when you drink it, you don't actually swallow it really quickly. You hold it in your mouth, breathing through your nose so you have oxygen. And one of the things that is very helpful is to just, as the carbonation, you can feel that in your mouth, you can go ahead and just start to unravel those thoughts. And then obviously, drink it down when you when you kind of run out of air, or you need to, when that kind of thought passes. So just a couple techniques. I invite you guys to kind of take a few or take away some options from these. And of course, if anything else is needed, idea wise, I'm more than happy to provide those as well. But that was pretty much all I had for today. And I thank you all so much for allowing me to be here.